I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to the dyeing and development of the bonus colorway for the 2021 Summer Mini Skein mini-series. I want to create something that feels like outside in the summer, that really evokes plant life, maybe a little bit floral, and really embraces some of my favorite parts of summer. Most of the time, I dye my colorways in pretty small batches. So there are a few other things I need to think about when I want to dye a lot more skeins of a colorway where I know I'll be doing multiple batches. The first consideration is obviously getting a colorway that I like and that I am proud of and that fits what I want to create. But I also have to consider what I can scale up. If I use a colorway that maybe requires a really long cool down overnight versus just a couple hours before I can reuse the spot on my stove, that can be a little bit harder. So I want to balance these considerations and try out two different versions of this summery colorway I want to create. One that is more immersion on the stove and another that is a more countertop speckled version. Before we go and talk more about the project, please make sure that you are subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video. But now, let's go plan out this colorway. In addition to the two different techniques I want to explore today, we are going to dye two different yarn bases. Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and then Knit Picks Swish DK, which is 100% superwash merino. These two bases actually take up dye really similarly, even though they technically have different fiber contents. One bigger difference between a DK and a fingering weight yarn that are both 4-ply is that the twist, therefore, in this DK is loftier. Just because if you have a 4-ply on a thicker yarn and a thinner yarn, there's going to be more twist with the thinner plies. And so therefore, sometimes speckles may seem a lot sharper on a fingering weight yarn than a DK, which I'm only really pointing out because this is something that came up in the ChemKnits Lab Facebook group recently to when I'm filming this. I pre-soaked all of the yarn in some plain tap water for at least 30 minutes. In the bucket, I have 6 skeins total, 3 DK, 3 fingering. So on one of the techniques, we'll have 2 sock, 1 DK, and then the other will have 2 DK and 1 sock. So that way we'll be able to look at the final colorway on both bases. I want to go for something floral and summery. Think a climbing vine in bloom, warmth, vacation. That's the vibe I'm going for this year. The star of our show is going to be emerald green. And then I want pops of pink and yellow and to have various hues of the green weave through. So for sure, or at least I think for sure, I'm going to be starting with these 4 colors. Emerald green, sage leaf, which brings in some blues, ballerina pink, and sunflower yellow, which brings in some browns. These 3 colors look very muted, but they're not actually that muted when we use them with dry powder. In fact, the ballerina pink really packed a lot of punch. Now, I do have on deck pink orchid in case I need a brighter pink. On deck, I also have sour apple, some delphinium blue if I need some more blue notes, and I didn't pull it, but maybe electric violet could come into play if I feel it's necessary, but I don't want to overdo it with the number of colors I'm using. So we'll start by looking at these 4, then we will evaluate if we want more color. All of the tools and equipment that I'm using today are dedicated for dyeing yarn and are never used for the preparation of food. This is a 4-inch deep full-size catering steam pan, sometimes also called a chafer pan, and I love using this for low immersion. I can fit it on 2 burners of my stovetop. While I'm dealing with dry powders, I will be wearing a respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves, so my voice will be more muffled, but please make sure you have adequate safety equipment. when dealing with dry powders. My respirator mask is a half rubber respirator mask with 2 P100 filters. If you'd like to learn more about the tools and equipment that I use for my dyeing projects, you can find a bunch of links down in the video description. I just added 10 cups of water to my pan, and to this I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. We want things to strike, not necessarily super slow or fast, but I am going to, I think, reduce. Actually, I don't think I want to reduce this water volume. I have a yarn mop that I want to use to wipe my gloves on to remove excess powder as I switch between colors. And I thought I would soak in this pan, but I like the depth that we have here. So I am gonna go soak this, actually, in our bucket. Now, here's the problem. All right, I have a cup that's about this full. Let's see how many tablespoons it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6.5 tablespoons. And one reason why I'm adding it now into the bucket is that since the next technique we will do is going to be a tabletop technique followed by steaming, we need acid in here anyway. So the bucket's going to heat up between 1/3 and half full, and we just added that much acid. So this is approximate, very approximate, but now our little mop is ready to wipe my fingers on. For our Immersion colorway, we have a lot of acid in here, but I am starting cool on the counter to give us a little bit more chance to work some colors through. Starting with the emerald green, I'm going to bring it in and pretty heavily go in. Now I will be adding it further than this later on, but this is our starting, trying to get a feel of what we've got so far. I love the tendrils of dye streaming out. Here is our sage leaf, which I'm bringing in right here, and I'm going to go over it one more time. Ooh, funny, it might change when we add heat, because that's looking very, very sage leaf to me right now, and not like I'll pop up the swatch that had some blue in it. I don't mind, but I have a feeling that this color will shift when we apply heat. But right now I really like it. Now for some Ballerina pink. And this color, I don't really need quite as much. So it is not as intense as some other pinks that we've used. It is bright, but not overpowering so. The nice thing about using a bright color that is a pastel means that as if I add a lot of powder, we get punch in one spot. But I think if I added this much powder of, say, pink orchid, it would really spread. And then here is the sunflower yellow. Which is really pretty and makes me think a little bit of daffodils. It has a little bit of grit to it, but I think is still really, really lovely. So, okay, I'm seeing some blues from the sage kind of come through. Do I want... Yeah, I'm definitely starting to see some blues come in from that sage leaf. Let's go ahead and apply bits of sage leaf
around. Don't forget that we don't have any heat yet. Once we have heat, then I'm not going to be able to tap my fingers in this in the same kind of way. I would say of all these colors that we've used, and there I see that sage breaking, sort of deepening. I guess it didn't need heat. It just needs some time to like dissolve and absorb, because this has deepened a lot, I think, as I have sat here talking, which is nice. But need to keep that in mind. Okay, that, and let's go for, oh, there's some more sage. There's not very much color for the yarn mop yet. And then let's come in with this emerald. I'm sort of mixing, I don't even know where I'm going right now, it feels like. Because I thought that I was going to be layering things a lot more than I am so far. Okay, and then I am going to sort of work this green in. I'm undecided as of yet. Like, I think I'm undecided if the direction I want to go, if I want more blue in here, or yeah, I think let's bring in that Delphinium. Now there's not really a good bare spot to showcase this color right now. But maybe instead of a bright purple, a little bit of a purpley blue. To help. So let me show you. Well, okay, that's looking way purple right now. I don't think it's actually that purple from what I remember. It's more blue, but maybe a bunch of these colors just look really different. Okay. We might rethink a lot of things in a moment, but let's take this over to the stove and start heating it up. I think my regret is I should have gone for bigger patches of the yellow and the pink, but we'll see how these colors spread over them as we flip and move. So I'm going to turn on the heat. So the heat is on 2 burners. And while we're here, okay, we've got a fair amount of green still. Okay, so let's go ahead. There's something to this that I like, but I'm going to go ahead and hold off on starting the other colorway until I feel more satisfied with this. I do like the direction we're headed in though. After 10 minutes, I feel like you can see more of the blue from this Delphinium and maybe even some blue from that sage. I want to continue and try to, well, let's flip. Let's flip first. Okay, so we have some color that went through, but there's going to be a lot of white in the interior. Ooh, good. Some pinks and did come through. But as we add more color, things are going to spread. What? Oh, funny. Things are going to spread more and blend a little bit more together. So we will see how that goes. I put my respirator mask back on and safety glasses, of course. And then we started layering these colors in, starting with the pink and yellow, because I figured I could layer everything around that.
I decided to save the emerald green to last because that is the most dominant color we have here, and I figured we could add it over everything. I did wipe my hands on the yarn mop after adding the colors and used my little metal spoon to help move and wiggle the colors through. It's okay to have some speckles with this, but we're not necessarily aiming for speckles, if that makes sense. Once I was done adding the colors, I waited 10 minutes before flipping the yarn again and adding more color. Layering the green on at the end really allowed me to see this start to come to life. And I love these floral colors working together in this sea of green that does have variation because of the way that these different colors are layering together. With the yellow and the green, we get more grass and yellow-green colors, and I'm really, really enjoying it. Even where the green layers on the pink, it gives us some mauve and maroon, still very, very floral colors and reminiscent of the different hues you can see in buds and things like that. I also really, really like the way that I was able to leave some of the brighter green speckles behind on the pink and yellow. And I think that that really, really just helps bring everything together. And I love the way these colors are combining together. I am now going to let this sit for a final 10 minutes before we flip and add more water volume if we think that is needed. The pinks and yellows are subtle and have gotten smaller, as in some places the green has overtaken, and other places it's a little bit muddier, but that is good. That is what I wanted. We have pastels and deep, and it's a very loud, maybe loud's not the right word. It's a very busy yarn. It's very variegated. This is something that, maybe wouldn't hold up well with super intricate cables because all these color changes would be quite different as you're knitting it up. But that's also something that for some other projects will be really, really fun to incorporate. What I'm seeing on the monitor of my camera does not reflect quite what I see. I feel like things might be blown out. The colors will be ultimately medium toned, not ultra saturated, but I think that I'm hitting that floral vine or flower garden arrangement colorway that I was wanting. There are some hints of green left, but I feel like most of the color has absorbed. I am going to go ahead and flip as a final check. You can see there's like a light wash of green, and as I flip, part of me is like, ooh, maybe let's add a tiny bit more. Okay, I'll go suit up and we'll add a tiny bit more to some of these patches. I've got the Delphinium blue here. Normally maybe I wouldn't have bothered, but I want to bring these feelings through. Where did I put you? The Delphinium blue is a really fun color because it does break red. So that'll bring more pinks into everything. I'm not layering all the colors, but some of these areas are pale enough that I want just a bit more. Just a bit more. And I think that it's important to admit that if you want more, add more. And I'm okay if there's some, well, there's some more Delphinium white left and Speckles left. But there we go. All right, I'm gonna wait 10 minutes, then I'm gonna add more water. All right, I'm coming in with 8 cups of water. There's a fair amount of acid in here, so I'm not planning on adding more. But what adding this water is doing
is allowing the yarn more space to float, and therefore giving space for pockets of any unbound dye to bind. It is mostly all absorbed, but I am going to bring the heat up. I have it on medium heat. I'm going to bring the heat up, heat this for 20 minutes. Then I will turn off the heat and let the yarn cool. Here's a brief view of our yarn mop that has elements of these 5 colors all wiped onto it. And I feel like looking at this, you can get a feel for a little bit of how our second colorway is going to go, because I want to, on the countertop, do heavy-ish speckles. So rather than going for fine speckles, I'll be still layering on the powder lightly, but in heavier patches, similar to what I did for the 2020 bonus colorway for Hanukkah. And instead of doing blues and purples, we're going to do a lot of emerald green again. That's going to be the dominant color. But then with pops of these other 4 throughout. I just need to remind myself that there is a fair amount of variability with actually both of these techniques. Any technique where you aren't measuring out the amount of dye and you're doing it by feel can give big differences from batch to batch, especially when you're not doing them side by side. So I know that some of these may have more or less white, and that is okay. I have 300 grams of yarn here spread out on my protected counter. And we are going to start speckling on here. But I'm going in heavy. So this is allowing some dye to fall to different strands, down, below, but we're going pretty heavy. When I removed the yarn from my pre-soak, I did leave some liquid in here. So it's not gonna drip heavily, but I could have squeezed it one more time if I wanted to. Now, as I'm doing this, we are speckling heavy, but I still want the powders to fall, and I don't want it to clump on the yarn. And the reason why we don't want it to clump is that we want the color to dissolve and bind in the yarn. What we don't want is for these colors, we do not want them to just be stuck in a clump and therefore not dissolve, because then that's yarn that we will have to wash. Okay, so we did lines, and now I'm coming in. Don't forget that this emerald green is the dominant color. Got the yarn mop right there, but we do want to pay attention to the ends. And with any luck isn't quite the right word, but because of going slightly heavier in, we're going to get bigger speckles. But this also should allow us to not need to flip it as many times. Now, I am curious with my mop here how much color we can keep putting in it. I do have another one soaking just in case we need it. This technique is one that's lots of fun. Okay, I think I still want to go not necessarily heavy, but with these more pastel colors, as I go, quote, heavy in here, they won't have as much of a punch as that green. And I am trying to pay attention to make sure I get edges. Don't forget that this color I did see change once it really started to dissolve and settle into the yarn. But this is going to just bring us more green and some blue Okay, that is pretty. I think sage is another color I need to play more with, a lot more with. Okay, next up, I think I'll do the Delphinium blue, which we're still going heavy, but and rather than doing lines, I'm doing more spots, because overall there is less of this color than there will be of our green. And it's okay if it layers in with some. I need to remember that I'm bringing in the yellow and the pink shortly. Okay, we can always, the thing with color is you can always add more, but you can't always remove it. So that is worth keeping in mind. I have a feeling some of these colors are starting to strike in here already. Okay, let's do our pink. So what's interesting as I'm thinking about this colorway is that different techniques really shine differently. And so in some respects, this might be faster to execute, but it depends on, I guess, exactly how I'm going about adding the colors in. But adding the speckles like this, I am needing to really think about it, because with the other technique, I could see what the colors really looked like, whereas this time there's still going to be some layering, but they're not layering in quite that same way. And ultimately, okay, some of this green has not absorbed yet for sure. Ultimately, this colorway and how it looks in the end is going to depend a lot on how much of each of the colors. Just like with Tunica, I had what I called like 5 different dye lots. And so I'm focusing, there's some areas where colors might be layered, but I'm focusing a bit on areas where there isn't much color left. As we bring in the sunflower, which may heavier, may end up looking a little more brown, but we will see. Oh, that was a little heavy. This time we have 2 skeins of fingering and 1 of DK. Okay, I would say that is pretty good for our first round. I am going to wipe off this glove, just so that way I don't have a ton of color. We are going to rotate this mop. I figure we may as well keep using it and adding more and more color on. And now I am going to flip the yarn over. And so as I'm doing this and scrunching it, patting it down and scrunching it, it's going to let these colors spread out a bit. But part of the reason for scrunching it, patting it, will also help some of these colors go through multiple areas. And as I'm looking here right now, I'm going back over these edges, which may have had parts that spread out down below but didn't have color last time. So that way We can try to avoid doing like 10 million flips, but we'll probably need to do more flips.
As I mentioned, this technique is a little bit faster, but I guess the limiting step is the steamer basket. I do find, however, it makes me feel more sore to lean over and speckle over the counter than it does to lean over the stove. Maybe because where the pan is on the stove is a little bit higher than where the yarn is on the counter. I'm not sure, but that's something that I noticed, that even though it might be a little faster physically, it's not necessarily easier. But one thing I should consider is doing this kind of speckling technique inside one of the catering steam pans in the future. That might save some of the spread of some mess, and that's something to consider. Yes, the yarn would be a little more scrunched up, but it was pretty scrunched up here, so there's always a lot to think about.
All right, that is the bulk of the colors. And if I look at the inside of where some of these ties are, I can tap it, sort of moving and tapping this down. The color is definitely not as saturated as what we did with the other one, but with areas that feel white, I can tap it onto the counter and use my fingers to try. So like right here, there's a white section. To try to bring some of that color in. Okay. This is really pretty. I think it may, as a technique, I like what we're getting. Right now, I think I prefer the other one because it allows us to layer the colors more. And so that is just showing more of what the colors all look like together, but we'll see how the colors bloom when I steam set this. So I'm gonna go put this in my steamer basket on the stove right now. Now we do have color left on our work surface, and that is where our yarn mop is going to come in. And I don't think I'm going to be able to get all of it because there's a lot of pigment here in our mop already, but we should be able to soak up most of the dye. Now, if you don't have leftover or extra skeins of yarn that you want to dye at your disposal, some people like to use remnants to soak up extra dye and to mop it up. As a fun way to just have little bits of different colors to then use as a scrappy project later on. So I just wanted to mention that as an option. But now I am going to go and place this in the steamer basket to steam set this as well. And it's going to be the same steamer basket. I am going to steam the yarn in here for 30 minutes, then let it cool completely so we can wash it. Let's wash this first colorway. I think it's really pretty. I think that the mistake I made was for going for tiny pops of some of these colors instead of the larger pops like I did when I did the Mystical Forest colorway. I think that I could have gone bigger. But we'll see what it looks like dry, and I'll see if I need to edit this. And of course we'll also look at the second colorway. There is a hint of green left in the pan, and I'm seeing a hint of green here in the wash. Not a lot, but a hint. So I'm going to add a little bit of some Centrafol, and what I'm doing is I just stuck my finger in, and I'm rinsing that off, just to add just a little bit. This is a neutral pH, low foaming detergent that is, okay, there was undissolved dye somewhere because I just got some on my arm right there. Synthropol is supposedly good at helping pull out unbound dye. I may have overdone the green a little bit. The color is really fun. It's not quite what I had in my head, but I think that as soon as I was adding the pink and yellow in those tiny little pops versus larger sections like I did with the Halloween or Mystical Forest, I think that that is when I was taking this in another direction. And emerald green is pretty intense. Ooh-wee. All right, let's see. Just that hair still. I am going to give the yarn one more rinse, then I'm going to put it through my spin dryer and hang up the yarn to dry, and we can wash our speckled yarn. Okay, here is our speckled yarn plus our yarn mop. Which one is the yarn mop? I think it's hard to say. I'll have to look closely at the end to see if I can tell which one is the yarn mop. That is really funny. Probably the one with the least amount of speckles, so probably this one is the yarn mop. But this is fun. Ooh, okay, so we are seeing some bleeding, which, shoot, it might be too, I don't know if we've got some whites left in there. I'm like, it could be a little, quote, too late to try to see if the Synthropol, I'm just coating my fingertips, to see if the Synthropol will help keep, what do they call it, back coloring? Back staining of areas. We did add a lot. So in this colorway, the pink and blue and green pops more. It's funny, I think that before the washing stage, I liked the Immersion colorway better. Now I'm liking this one more. It's closer to my vision. Yeah, this one might be fitting. I might like that one more. I don't know. This is a big reason why I decided that I was going to wait for them to be dry so we could make our final determination and decide which direction to go. Certainly they are similar, and actually the two would go together extremely well. But I absolutely look forward to hearing which one you all like better down in the comment section. I'm going to go ahead and add just a splash of white vinegar to our wash bath. Let's see how we're doing. All right, I'm not seeing really any more color come off, which is good, which is really good. I am really excited to take a closer look at these. I think that the colors are coming off more blue on camera right now. Let me see. Yeah, they're maybe still showing up a little blue, but I think that the pops of color are standing out more here. So, we are gonna have to see. But anyway, I'm gonna go rinse this to make sure all of that soap, there's a tiny bit of soap left in there, out, put it through my spin dryer, hang it to dry, and we'll come back and think about which one we like better. Here are the finished summery, gardeny, vine, I'm not sure what I would call it, but the finished prototypes. And they are very, very similar and actually would fade really well together. But I found myself going back and forth over which one of these colorways I wanted to be the colorway. And it's really interesting to me because when I was dyeing this, the Immersion one, I had a lot of doubts because it was feeling so green. The pinks weren't popping the way I wanted them to. But looking at it dry, it's awesome and really, really spectacular. And then when it came to the Speckled on the countertop, I had some similar debates, less about how I felt about the colorway, but more about the variation between these three. I'm not sure how obvious it is, but our DK skein right here has more defined speckles and there's more
they're still speckles, but there's more watercolor spread on our fingering weight yarn. And I think that the where that comes into play could have to do with how much water was left in the skein when I went to speckle it. I intentionally left more liquid in the sock yarn, and I'm not used to seeing more defined speckles on this DK, but I think that I potentially had less water in here, which means we had less spread. And the hesitation, I love how this turned out. My hesitation was that, well, are these other skeins, they're so close to the yarn mop. Yes, the colors are more spread, there are more speckles, but, and I mean, I love the yarn mop too, but I think that debate and like, is there gonna be consistency within the skeins? Because to me, these almost feel like two different types of colorway. See, I think side by side here, you get a sense of the different feeling. And so not knowing when I went to go dye this again, which one I would end up with, did concern me. So anyway, I love the countertop effects that we got here, and I actually thought that this was the direction I was gonna go, but looking at the Immersion version drying, I realized that this colorway was my favorite. I think that overall, it is a lot more green and less variegated than what I was initially envisioning. But a big reason for that is that I picked, for all of these contrasting colors, more pastel pre-mixed colors. So that way when I'm adding the powder on of that Ballerina pink with a similar intensity that I'm adding on that emerald green, the emerald green is way more potent. And so of course it's gonna overtake everything, especially when I'm adding it more all over. Anyway, so I think that changing my expectation and seeing this as a beautiful green with these little flecks of color, that I think that this will knit up and you will really feel like it is a vine just starting to bloom, which is perfect and summery, and I am really so excited. Ooh, maybe Overgrown. That could be a really fun name for it. I don't usually name my colorways. So here are all the prototypes, and now I am going to go and quickly show a bit of a montage of me dyeing up more of this colorway. Rebecca, I don't know if that section needs, I don't know if that section still needs voiceover or if you should just set it to music. And then I am going to take some B-roll of the rest of the yarn and put it out here, and you can film conclusions either over a voiceover or whatever makes sense. I feel like that this colorway is another great example of why it really helps to play with your different premixed dye colors and get a good feel for them. Because if you want them to behave in a particular way, understanding their relative potency and which colors spread more or bind quickly can really come in handy. For example, the emerald green does spread a little more. It bled a little bit, but did thankfully resolve pretty easily. If it had been a heavy bleeder, I probably would have redeveloped the entire colorway to have something that is more wash friendly. Similarly, if I had picked more pigmented accent colors for this, like a sapphire blue, that pink orchid, and maybe a brilliant or bright yellow, I'm blanking on the Dharma name versus the jacquard name. But if I'd picked those colors, they would have had a lot more impact, gone through more of those layers, and we might have ended up with a whole different feel to the yarn versus this overgrown garden feel, which maybe feels very appropriate because parts of my own garden are a bit overgrown and could use some love and taming. But I think that these little pops of accent colors will show up in little areas as you're knitting this overall green yarn. And I think it'll be really fun how that comes into play. It makes the whole colorway a little bit less wild, even while still feeling wild and overgrown. And so I'm really proud of it and really excited for this to be the bonus colorway for the 2021 Summer Mini Skein mini series. For the yarn mop this time, I started with the Skein soaked in vinegar, a bit more saturated. This made it actually easier to wipe the amount of dye as I was working on 2 pans onto the Skein, and I think some colors did really start striking because you can see we've got a lot of coverage on here, and the colors still, you could feel all the notes of the different ones with some beautiful breaking of that Delphinium blue. But once I have spot on the stove, I will go ahead and steam this for 30 minutes. And I know that time lapse was mega fast, but here is a look at the back pan. Ultimately, the colorway is extremely similar, whether we're looking at the DK or sock yarn. There are some differences. In part, I'm not sure if the nylon in Stroll really comes into play in a Stroll versus Swish way, but certainly both of these yarn lines are 4-ply, but one is DK and one is fingering weight. And so therefore there's a difference in the tightness of the spin and a difference with the way that colors absorb. But I just really am excited with how this turned out. A lot of times when I dye up yarn in batches, and with the redyes I was dyeing I think 4 skeins at a time in the pan. There can be some variation between skein and skein. And certainly there are variations between the different skeins, but I cannot pick out which of these 16 skeins were dyed in which pan in which order. And I did mix fingering and DK in the different pans as well, just for some fun side-by-side comparisons. Looking at all the yarn, I am really proud with how Overgrown turned out. And yes, in the top right hand corner, I do have our Speckled and some yarn mops, but I think that this is a very fun green, and I really love it, and I hope that if you are unwrapping one of these skeins right now, that you really love it too. Well, that is our 2021 Summer Mini Skein mini series, and I had so much fun filming this whole project, and I really hope that you have enjoyed the whole series, and if you got a sampler and a bonus skein, that you really love your yarn. I showed off the packaging that I put together for the samplers at the end of the very first episode of this series, so I just wanted to share some pictures of the bright green packaging with my designed sunflower labels that I did use for these bonus skeins. And there were some really cute gardeny progress keepers that I added on for the wrapping just for fun. So I really hope that you enjoyed all of these little details to just make the unboxing a really fun experience, and maybe to give you a little something to get excited about if you're waiting for this video to actually unwrap your yarn. I know some of you may have unwrapped it in advance, and that is perfectly fine, but I know that I'm excited to now finally be able to share pictures of all of these projects. It's really hard not sharing spoilers along the way. I filmed this a while ago, and since then, I've done more explorations with Synthropol and more explorations with different colors and their relative pigmentation potency to one another. And so I hope to continue to explore my collection of dyes to really start to get as good of a feel of more of the colors beyond my few favorites that I go back to again and again and again. Neon fluorescence and navy. Not that I expect I'm going to have the best handle and memory on what the 80 some Dharma acid dyes plus the 40 Jacquard acid dyes I have at my disposal, but the more you play with different colors, the more you can anticipate how they might behave in different situations. And so that can help you at times, if you want a certain effect, then you can pick the right colors, the right premixed colored powders to help you achieve that. So if I wanted a bigger punch of that pink, I knew I could have gone for something more pigmented like that pink orchid. But ultimately, I'm really happy that I did go for these more premixed pastels because it meant that I could really lean into the green, which was pretty much what I wanted to do. But anyway, I have more learning, more playing to do with color, and so please make sure you're subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I do big series like this a couple times a year, but beyond that, I publish at least 2 new yarn dyeing videos every single week. And I always film these videos. Sometimes I film them when it's something I know it's going to happen and it's a technique I'm really confident in. But other times I'm filming these videos as I'm trying something for the first time. So you can really watch me learn and troubleshoot along the way, because I think that this journey of learning to dye yarn and becoming a better yarn dyer does involve making mistakes and sharing happy accidents. And this is why I share both my failures and successes. And I think that, well, I know that I learn so much along the way, and I hope that you all learn a lot as well. But now that this series has wrapped, it's time for me to start filming and full on go into planning my Hanukkah special, which does start a little bit earlier this year. Hanukkah starts in November. So make sure you stay tuned. I don't have an official announcement of when I will release pre-orders for the Hanukkah samplers, but I have been thinking about the themes and what I want to do for it for a while, and I'm really excited to share this with you. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.